there was lots of information about Tudor Places, sites, buildings, interiors, those that aren't here anymore, those that are still here. But they were sort of dotted around in different places. And the idea of the magazine was to bring them all together in one place.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this latest interview on the British History Channel with me, Philippa Lacey Brewell. Today is a bit of an impromptu one. We're adding this into our historian interview series. The lady I am interviewing today is Deb Roil, and she is one of a pair behind the Tudor Times website, tudortimes.com, which I would thoroughly recommend for articles, especially people profiles and places profiles as well. But she is for about the last 12 months, but more in working time, the editor of a new magazine that's now on its fourth issue, Tudor Places. This is issue 1. And I want to ask her about the magazine, about how they choose what to go in it. Why is there such an interest in Tudor Places? So we're going to be doing that in just a moment. So stay tuned. Welcome, Deb. Thank you for chatting to me today about your wonderful magazine.
It's a pleasure. I'm really pleased to be here.
So I've look, in preparation, I have my 4 copies so
Wonderful.
far.
Yay.
My 4 issues of Tudor Places, because I mean we'll get into it, but what I would say is what you've created here is such a brilliant resource that anyone who's thinking of subscribing, just make sure you have enough book space or buy a bookcase, because you're going to want to keep them all, I think, because they're sort of the content isn't going to ever be irrelevant, if you know what I mean. It's not like it dates.
No, exactly. I mean, there are articles on subjects and things that pulls together information that you'll always want to come back and as you say, reread and check and everything.
Yeah, exactly. So before we get into the magazine specifically, can we give people a little bit of an idea of your background, how you came to being the editor of Tudor Places?
Sure. Well, I don't know, probably you can still tell from my accent, I'm actually a Kiwi, but I've always, like so many of us, had an interest in history, loved history, did a history degree, and even though I was living in New Zealand then, it was all about English and European history. I've always loved English and European history. Did a history degree, even though I knew that I wasn't cut out to be a teacher, but just loved it so much, and that idea of follow your passion. Ended up, as once again so many of us do, going into business, worked in sort of the tourism and leisure sector for a long time, but carried on my interest in history, moved over here and obviously was in heaven sort of with British history, European history, loved it, and carried on with my friend and colleague Melita Thomas, who also has a great love of history. We used to travel around and visit lots of places, and out of that actually came Tudor Times, the website, which we set up 8 to 9 years ago, coming up 9 years actually. So really loved working on Tudor Times, and sort of about 3 years ago, just before COVID, I started a master's in English building history. Always had a fascination with buildings, and so through the University of York did the English building history course that was set up and run by Emma Wells. In fact, I'm still working on my dissertation. I sort of put it on hold for a little bit, but I'm now working on my dissertation, which is Catherine Parr's Privy Apartments at Hampton Court Palace, which fascinating. So doing that, and I'm also writing a book on Tudor Places, which has been ongoing for a few years. So sort of all of those things, I was getting more and more involved in the specifics really of Tudor buildings, Tudor Places, and loving it. And that's really when the idea of the magazine evolved. I was sort of through the study in the book, I was getting more and more involved with meeting people and learning about places. And I was thinking, is there a magazine about this? And it's that usual thing where you end up going, oh, I can't find one. Oh, maybe I'll create one. So I think, but in particular, it was very much, the more I got into it, the more I realized there was lots of information about Tudor Places, sites, buildings, interiors, those that aren't here anymore, those that are still here. But they were sort of dotted around in different places. And the idea of the magazine was to bring them all together in one place and to provide information that wasn't readily available out there. I sort of learnt so much through the course and found about so much work and research that's happening, that I thought this would be a good way of sharing that to a wider audience.
Well, I think you're doing a fantastic job. I love the way you were like, you've just listed off all the things you were doing, and then I decided to set up a magazine.
Oh, I know, it's madness, isn't it? It is madness.
You've definitely got the entrepreneurial spirit, haven't you? That is definitely. So you've kind of touched on it there about what your vision for the magazine was initially. Now you're 4 published issues in, so yes. Clearly you're further on than the readership are. Is it what is it now? Is it exactly as you imagined? Have you got what's sort of the vision for going forward?
Yes, well? It is, if not even better. I mean, I've been absolutely delighted with the support of the contributors. So the idea really was to have expert contributors sharing their knowledge and information that you couldn't really find, not necessarily not available elsewhere or not widely available. And the vision is very much about sort of the who, where, what, why. I mean, the who's interesting. So patrons that are involved in the development of the buildings, making the buildings possible. And it's very much looking at what was the world that the Tudors lived in. So obviously that included churches and cathedrals from the medieval period. What did their world look like? And I'm delighted with how much we've got of that into the magazine already. I mean, I was really lucky that Tracy Borman, Historic Royal Palaces, has been hugely supportive, and we have the curators of Historic Royal Palaces are writing a feature article for each issue. Historic Houses, James Probert and Historic Houses have been hugely supportive as well. So, you know, there's been people that have really got behind the magazine, and I've been delighted by that because it's helping us reach an even broader audience more quickly, and the quality of the material that's there. I mean, for the first issue, Dr. Alden Gregory from Historic Royal Palaces wrote about Anne Boleyn's apartments, the lost apartments at the Tower of London. And it's such a good example because then I'd read a little bit about it, really fascinated by it. You know, you've got these massive apartments that were built for Anne Boleyn by Henry VIII for her coronation. It's very hard to find information out about them, really, because there's very few remains. There's almost just a few stones remaining at the Tower of London now. And Alden wrote this fascinating article that actually brings together all that's known about it and what we do know. And obviously you've got the accuracy as well. And
so this is the article. And so, I mean, I think what it does is it allows, I mean, yeah, he goes into brilliant detail.
Oh, it's in wonderful images.
And yes, and because you're talking to people who've got, you know, who curators, excuse me, of these sorts of places, you've got had amazing images of things that you don't just see if you're browsing along on the internet.
Exactly. So it's information that you wouldn't readily get anywhere else, definitely. Yeah. And in fact, he's doing the same for the King's House at the Tower of London. So people might recognise that's sort of the black and white property. If you're standing on the site where there's the memorial to the execution of the prisoners, such as Anne Boleyn, and look across the green, you actually see what's the King's House. And there's a myth that it was built for Anne Boleyn. It wasn't. It was actually built after she died. And that's in issue 5. But it's really interesting because not only does it sort of put paid to the myths, but you learn so much that you didn't know already. I mean, I knew a bit about it, and I've learned so much because my first question to him was, why does the name change? How come it's been the Queen's house? How come now it's the King's house? How did that happen? So these people are bringing all these interesting facts that, as I say, are not readily available otherwise.
I think that's what. So I think there's two advantages to it being a magazine format. You've got what is a footnote topic, for instance. Oh, we've now lost Anne Boleyn's apartments. They were around about here. You've got I think it's like 6 pages, 8 pages dedicated to actually delving into that. And then the other immediate advantage I can think of with it being a magazine format is it's up-to-date information. The latest in where we've got to with looking at, research into something.
Yes. And I think the other thing is about the magazine format is it is available in print and digital. And obviously both of those have advantages, but more people are buying print because people do like, with a topic like this, to have a print. It's sort of like a small book in a way. They have it as a resource to go back to, but also with buildings, images are wonderful, aren't they? You want to look at the images, and we have made it a bit glossy, and images are an important part of the magazine so that people can really see the detail.
So I mean, that's just a flavour of the type of articles that are in here. So have you got any, this is probably going to be very, very hard because they're all fabulous, but have you got any favourite articles so far? Any you're particularly proud of? That
You're right. That's sort of like choosing my favourite child. I love them all. And then I was thinking, gosh, there's probably about 30 to 35 that we've published already. I guess the thing about the cover articles, I mean, we talked about the Anne Boleyn one, the apartments, Anne Boleyn's apartments. For issue 2, we looked at the footsteps of the Cornish rebels. And I really loved this one because the magazine's not just about buildings, it is about places and sort of sites. And Julian Humphreys has done a fabulous article where, so not only in a way does he tell the story of the Cornish rebels, but he actually shows the places that they visited when they came all the way from Cornwall and marched all the way up to London. And there's a few places that you can still go and see. There's plaques and there's markers, so you can still actually go and see the sites where the events happened. And I loved that because it's as I say, it's a bit different. And the other thing it does, which I think is so important about places and what they tell us, is it really helps you see it through the eyes of the people that were living it. So we can you can read about the Cornish Rebellion. It's like, oh yeah, no, understood, not happy with taxes. But actually, when you look at how far they marched and how long it took, it starts to bring home to you how major it was and how strong the feeling and what a groundswell there was about this, and how relatively successful they were getting all the way up to London before they were defeated. So I love that article because it sort of gives a different perspective.
It's such an interesting point because you've just made me think there. A lot of the history that we talk about, especially in the Tudor period, because it's emanating from what's happening at court, it's very London centric.
Yes, yeah.
And as if everyone else's lives, not only different classes, but location wise, but it is on the periphery as sort of a side note to what's happening in London.
Well, yeah, and that's such a thing. Actually, that's another sort of underlying sort of principle of Tudor Places, is it's very much to be representative all across England and Wales. And in every issue, I make a real point of ensuring that there's a widespread. But absolutely, I mean, Nathan Ammon has done 2 brilliant articles. One on Harlech Castle, which we talked about in Visiting Tudor Britain last week, but another one on Tenby, and I've got a soft spot for that one as well, because the article is Tenby, the most important Tudor town, ? And once again, it's sort of those hidden stories people possibly don't really know or remember, the connection of Tenby with the Tudor story, with Jasper Tudor and later Henry VII escaping through Tenby when they went across to the continent. So trying to bring in those hidden stories and making it very much about all of England and Wales.
Yeah, well, it's a really good you're getting a very good spread of places. It's really, really good.
Oh, thank you. And then I would just say, sorry to interrupt, but sort of almost going counter to what you just said, but one of the other features that's really popular is Elizabeth Norton, Dr. Elizabeth Norton, is doing a Lost Palaces series. So in each issue, it's those palaces that are no longer here, but you could still go and see traces of them. Now, some of them, like Chelsea Manor, she did an amazing job, because literally the only trace that you can see is a plaque.
Wow.
And she's written an article about that. The one that's coming out in issue 5 is actually Eltham Palace, which you can see. That's the most you can actually see of the ones that we've got so far in the series, because you still do have the Great Hall there. But so far she's covered Otlands Palace, Richmond, Nonsuch. I do have a soft spot for Nonsuch. I really enjoyed that one as well. But she's continuing with those. And in fact, that's been so popular that what we're looking at is Julian Humphreys is doing a series now on the colleges at Oxford and Cambridge. So completely different. I guess that's the other thing I've really looked at with the magazine, is I want it to be all forms of buildings, sites and places. You know, we love the palaces and castles and manor houses. They're amazing. But also bringing in things like the Oxford and Cambridge colleges, looking at guild halls. In fact, one of the first issue, Julian did an article on Henry VIII's device forts. So looking at the forts that were built along the south coast when they were worried about invasion. So yeah, very much trying to bring in the whole variety of places.
Yes, I love I especially love the Lost Palace series, actually, and anything that Julian writes is brilliant. He's fascinating. So yeah, it's you've got such a fabulous range of writers. Emma Wells,
yes,
does amazing articles.
So she specialises very much in church, so cathedrals and churches. She did Ripon Cathedral so far. She's also written about Wells Cathedral. But two of my favourites of hers is she wrote an article about how the Reformation affected parish churches. So, and I know that sort of sounds quite a complex topic, and it is, but it's very visual, because it's when you go into a local church and the faces of the monuments are defaced, when you see rood screens and those sorts of things, which are also defaced. So she's written about why that was done, but it's got fabulous images. She's got some wonderful images in it, which I love as well. And then in the last issue, she wrote about stained glass, medieval stained glass, which is obviously just amazing images for that as well.
And that feeds into the idea that you're trying to, you're pursuing, of showing what the Tudor environment was like, not just, like you say, the palaces and castles, although of course they're very interesting, but what was it actually like? If you could just plonk you into Tudor Britain, or Tudor England, what is it looking like?
Exactly. And actually Tracy Borman came up with a great description of it. She said, Tudor Places is where social history meets building history. And the more that I've got involved in it, the more I'm interested by that, because actually what we can see today of places really tells us a lot about how these people lived. For example, if you think this is the period where there was a big changes in architecture. So, you sort of moved from the medieval Great Hall, very broadly, into increasingly smaller rooms, and a larger number of rooms, but were smaller and used for different things. So that tells us a lot about the way people were living and how that was changing over the 16th century, for example. So, yeah, it's very much, as you say, about their whole environment and what it would have looked and felt like to a Tudor person.
Why do you, we're clearly very interested in everything that you cover. Why do you think, but there is clearly also a large interest in Tudor history, Tudor places, Tudor travel. Clearly, that's what I'm specialising in. But what do you think is the draw? Why are people so interested?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Well, it's a tricky one, and then in some ways it's not. So I know we've talked a lot about why people are interested in the Tudors, and I think some of that is very specific to the places. So, they lived 500 years ago, which is a long time. So there's a long distance between us, but it's still close enough to be familiar when you can see what they looked like through the paintings, but also where they lived. It's sort of relatable. Some of it's very relatable and some of it's not. So the fantasies of what it would have been like to live in a castle, or what it would have been like to live in a palace, or, I think that's part of it. I mean, at the moment, the ones that still exist, they're a great day out, aren't they? There's that element as well. It's just a great day out to be able to go to some of these places that still exist and have a look around. There's wonderful information and interpretation and reenactors. So it's a great day out at one level. I think at a sort of more fundamental level, you've got that point about, if you love history, being able to stand in the place where history happened, your whole imagination, it's like thinking, what are the events that happened here? Who were the people? Am I looking at the same ceiling that, someone did 500 years ago that I've read about, understand, is this where these events happened? I think there's definitely that. I think with the vanished places, there's the element of mystery as well, so, and finding out about it sort of is the like doing a puzzle. So I think that's part of it as well. I think it's a whole combination of things, and we want to know different things at different times. So, sometimes it's just, well, I find, even though I absolutely love and, do as much with Tudor places as I can every day, sometimes it's going to a place and just absorbing it. When you and I went to Harvington Hall, which is just so special, I'd read quite a bit about it, and Phil was such a great guide, Phil Downing, that actually, as you know, I just put my camera down. It's like, I just want to absorb it. There's so much here. I just want to feel it and look at it, and I can sort of do the analysis and the thinking about it later. So it's a whole range of things, I think.
Yeah, our trip to Harvington was fabulous, and I think I shared it on Instagram when we went, and I admired you, because I think it's putting your camera down, because it's so tempting everywhere I go with the littlest amount of history. I will be taking photos, and it does stop you. It does prevent you from just absorbing it.
It's different, isn't it? It's a different experience.
It is. Yeah. Luckily for me, because I take groups places, I get to go multiple times, and you can just start to relax. I don't need to capture every corner because I can just absorb it now.
Exactly. And I guess that might bring me to sort of another key thing about the magazine that I was really keen to bring out, was all the work that's being done today on Tudor places. There's a whole community, there's a whole world of people that are running Tudor places that are open to the public or not open to the public. There's so much research being done. There's curatorial work. We do have a section in the magazine that's sort of an update and a news section, and that's where things to try and bring more of that out. So, for example, when they were doing the roof at Oxburgh Hall, and found all these amazing artifacts from the 16th century, which told them so much about how the house was used. So I really wanted to bring that up-to-date element as well, because one of the things that I find just amazing, for want of a better word, is how lucky we are that we still have so much of the Tudor buildings here today. And how do we? And so that's sort of around the conservation, it's around the people that are looking after them and how they're looking after them. And the stories around that too, I think, are just fascinating. The near misses, nearly losing so much, or things like with the Cowdrey House ruins, which are in the issue that's coming out at the end of February, issue 5, actually how much we lost as well when there was a fire. So that sort of element of, the conservation, the archaeology, the work that's been done today to help us know more about the buildings and to look after them is, I think, really fascinating too.
Yeah, it's working so well. And the magazine, like I said earlier, that format, that ability to bring the latest, I think is the one of the principal advantages of it being a magazine for me anyway. It's what draws, one of the things that draws me to it. I love that because I love the fact that we get challenged all the time. I think there's a trap with history that we think because it's happened before. In fact, people have said this to me. Well, it happened before, so we know about it all.
Yeah.
We don't, because when you get into it, it's the evidence that we have at the moment of how people lived, or everything is based on what we currently have. I mean, we're speaking now mid-February. It's only was it last week that 55 more letters of Mary Queen of Scots have been published as deciphered. The week before that, the Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon necklace was reported on. I know it was found before, and all these things start to challenge us to never settle on thinking we know it all. And I think that's
so right. Yeah,
important.
I mean, the Hever Castle rediscovered. That they announced there'd been a lot of ongoing research by Simon Thurley into Hever Castle, and they've done so much research there already, which is fantastic. But he now believed, based on the evidence, that Thomas Boleyn didn't build the Long Gallery, that it was actually built during the time that Anne of Cleves was there. And isn't that fascinating? And that alone starts to open up different possibilities, makes you start to think about the house differently, makes you start to think about Anne of Cleves in particular and her time there. And and this is a place that's already been quite well researched, and that's what I think is, I agree, that's one of the things that's so fascinating, that it's actually a very changing, evolving space. As more information, more research is done, more evidence, more things are found. Completely agree.
The Hever Castle research, I can't wait to hear more about that. Obviously I'll be at Hever with tours this year so I'm going to be seeing if I can understand it more. But it's not that long ago that we the collective world, looking back at history, wasn't sure how much time Anne of Cleves spent at Hever. So this does challenge, let's say, no, clearly not only did she spend time there, but she improved it. So she had a vested interest in that building. So I found that one particularly exciting, actually.
And there's so many examples like that. So and part of the purpose of the magazine is to bring those out, I think, and to provide a forum where those that are interested can find out more about it.
It's great. It's great to have access to so many different writers. And I said as well before about the variety of writers you've got, but not necessarily people who have written a book or whose book you would pick up if you hadn't heard of them, and you've got access to them there and then in those issues. So it's great. So what's for 2023? Well, actually, one question I have because I'm afraid I'm a very practical person, so I'm sorry if this is a boring question to everyone else, but how far ahead do you have to plan?
Well, yes. So before I published the first one, I'd actually mapped out a year, 6 issues worth of content, definitely with the feature articles. So there's 6 or 7 feature articles, plus there's regular contributors, as in Sarah the Tudor Travel Guide with itineraries and weekends away, with Brigitte Webster about living at Old Hall, so what it's like to live in a Tudor manor house today. So all of those were planned out for the whole 6 issues. Plus I have a list which is about 4 pages long of ideas and people I'm contacting, and I've now planned for the next sort of 4 to 6 actually issues I'm very keen this year to bring in more about the buildings themselves, the fabric of the buildings, things like wall paintings, for example, bricks, once again, why did they do it? How did they do it? Where did they do it? I mean, wall paintings are amazing. The ones we saw at Harvington Hall, they're just stunning.
Yeah,
and so many different sort of types. And then once again, trying to bring it back to where you can see them today. So I want to bring a bit more out about the fabric of the buildings, a bit more out about archaeology, and also the interiors. So things like, the furnitures and the tapestries. Well, obviously that's in more elite households, but sort of bringing out more about what they look like inside as well. Is definitely part of the plan. I've got some really exciting plans. We're growing our audience, which is fabulous. We can grow it a bit more. I've got some really exciting plans for the next stage. But my other big thing this year is I've got a book that has to be with my publisher this year, and it's coming out early in 2024, and that's all about Tudor Places. So this year's a big year for the magazine and for my book.
Well, fantastic. Well, I can't wait to see the book, as well as, of course, continue to get the magazine. So one thing I must mention, because I don't want to forget, is that people can get back issues. So don't worry if you're like, oh, well, I like to have a full set. I don't know if you're a collector. You can get back issues, can't you, still?
Yes.
Yeah.
So on the website, you can buy back issues individually. We also have a bundle of the first 3 issues if you want to get those. And then you can subscribe for the current issue and going forward.
Fabulous. So if people want to find you to follow you, find you to subscribe, where will they go?
So the website is tudorplaces.com. And then we're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Tudor Places.
And I will pop those links in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for joining me today, Deb. That was fascinating.
Oh, it's wonderful to talk to you. Thank you.